A student's overview of the ageless wisdom was carefully compiled from the following books by Alice A. Bailey. A Treatise on Cosmic Fire. Esoteric Psychology, Volumes 1 and 2. Esoteric Healing. Esoteric Astrology. The Rays and the Initiations. Students are encouraged to download the free PDF version of this overview by following the link in the video's description, or to order a printed copy at cost from thebookpatch.com, but are advised to read the original, unabridged books in order to gain deeper insight into the ageless wisdom. Students are also invited to join our online study group at facebook.com/groups/students of the ageless wisdom. Chapter 21, A Treatise on Cosmic Fire. The construction, vitalization and actuation of the thought form. The ego, having brought about a condition of receptivity, or of recognition in the physical brain of the man, and having drawn from him the necessary response, the process of building is thereupon begun. This process of physical plane response is based, as is all else in nature, upon the relation of the polar opposites. The physical centers are receptive to the positive influence of the force centers. The physical brain is responsive to the positive influence of the lower nature in the earlier evolutionary stages, or to the reactions of the substance of the sheaths, the impress of the lunar lords. It responds in the later stages to the positive influence of the ego or the impress of the solar lord. When man is learning consciously to create, which he does through the organization of thought, concentration and meditation, he proceeds more slowly, for he has two primary things to do before the creative process can be carried through. 1. To contact or communicate with the ego, or solar angel. 2. To study the process of creation and to make it conform step by step with natural evolutionary law. Starting, therefore, with the recognition of the egoic intent in the physical brain, the man proceeds to build the form for his idea. He begins first to organize the material required upon the mental plane. It is on that plane that the impulse takes to itself its primary form. On the desire or astral plane, the process of vitalization is largely pursued. For the length of the life of any thought form, even such an one as our solar system, is dependent upon the persistence of desire, and the strength of the desire. On the etheric levels of the physical plane, the process of physical concretion takes place. As the physical vehicle assumes the necessary proportions, the thought form becomes divorced from the one who is giving it form. Any idea of enough strength will inevitably materialize in dense physical matter, but the man-work of its creator ceases when he has worked with it on mental, astral and etheric levels. The dense physical response is automatic and inevitable. Some ideas of a large and important nature, which have arisen in the consciousness of the guides of the race, reach full manifestation only through the medium of many agents, and the dynamic impulses of many minds. A few work consciously, when this is the case, at the production of the necessitated form, many more are swept into activity and lend their aid through the very negativity of their natures. They are forced to be interested in spite of themselves, and are swept into the movement not through any mental apprehension or vital desire but because it is the thing to do. In this may be seen an instance of the ability of the great ones to utilize conditions of apparent inertia and negativity, due to little development, and thus produce good results. Having grasped the idea, and having with care discriminated the motive underlying the idea, thus ascertaining its utilitarian purposes, and its value to the group in the service of humanity. The man has certain things to do which, for the sake of clarity, we might sum up in certain statements. He has, first of all, to hold the idea sufficiently long for it to be faithfully registered in the physical brain. Frequently the ego will get through to the brain some concept, some portion of the plan, and yet will have to repeat the process continuously over quite a long period before the physical response is such that the solar angel can rest assured that it is intelligently registered and recorded. When the reaction between the two factors, the ego and the receptive physical brain, is established, the interplay is reciprocal, and the two are keyed or tuned to each other, the second stage is entered upon. The idea is conceived. A period of gestation is then pursued, itself divided into various stages. The man broods over the idea, he ponders upon it, thereby setting up activity in mental matter, and attracting to his germ thought the material necessary for its clothing. He pictures to himself the contour of the thought form, clothing it with color, and painting in its details. Hence will be seen the great value of a true imagination, and its ordered scientific use. Imagination is karma manasik in origin, being neither pure desire nor pure mind, and is a purely human product, being superseded by the intuition in perfected men, and in the higher intelligences of nature. End of page 98. When his will, or the initial impulse is sufficiently strong, and when the imagination, or power of visualization, is adequately vivid, the second part of the gestation period is entered upon, and the vitalization by desire is begun. The interplay of mental impulse and desire produce what might be called a pulsation in the organizing form of the idea, and it becomes alive. It is yet but nebulous and its tenuosity is great, but it shows signs of organization and the outline of its form. Students must remember that this entire process is being carried on now during this stage which we are considering from within the brain. There is thus a definite correspondence to the work of the 9 Sephiroth. The initial 3 correspond to the egoic impulse with which we have earlier dealt. The secondary group of Sephiroth find their analogy in the work pursued in the stage we are now dealing with, or the impulse of mind desire, emanating consciously from man's brain. The work of the final 3 is accomplished when the thought form, being clothed in mental and astral matter, passes into objectivity on the physical plane. A later stage in the gestation period is pursued when the thought form, being clothed in mental matter, and having become vitalized by desire, takes to itself a layer of substance of astral matter, and is consequently enabled to function on the astral plane as well as the mental. Here its growth is rapid. It should be carefully borne in mind that the process of building in mental matter proceeds simultaneously, and that the development is now twofold. Here the conscious builder must be careful to hold the balance, and not to let imagination unduly assume too large proportions. The manasic element and the kamic element must be justly proportioned, or else will be seen that too common manifestation, an idea wrongly conceived and nurtured, and therefore impossible of playing its just part in the evolutionary plan, being but a grotesque distortion. The idea now is reaching a critical stage, and should be ready for the assumption of physical matter and to take to itself an etheric form. When on etheric levels, it receives that final impulse which will lead to what may be called its actuating or its reception of that motivating impulse which will lead to its dissociation from its originator, and the sending out to assume a dense form and a separate existence. It should be remembered that the thought form has now passed from the mental plane, taken to itself an astral sheath, and likewise is gathering to itself a body of etheric matter. When it has reached this stage, its vitalization is proceeding apace, and the hour of its separated existence is drawing near. This vitalization is consciously carried out by the man who, according to the original intent or initial impulse, directs to the thought form energy of some kind. This energy is directed from one or other of the three higher centers, according to the quality of the embodied idea, and will be seen pouring towards the rapidly objectivizing idea from the particular center involved. We must not forget that we are considering the thought form of the conscious builder. The thought forms of the majority of human beings are energized from no such high source, but find their active impulse emanating from either the solar plexus, or the still lower organs of generation. People are mainly polarized in the astral body, as we know, and the lower centers are the most active, when an atmosphere or environment of thought forms of a low key and vitalized by all the baser forms of astral energy is coupled to this. It will become apparent how stupendous is the task of lifting humanity to a clearer, purer and better atmosphere, and how easy it is for the lower aspects and appetites to flourish and to grow. As the vitalization is pursued and the energy is poured from one or other of the centers into the thought form, the conscious builder begins to extend this influence in order to send it forth from him to perform its mission, whatever that may be, to make it occultly radiant so that its vibrations will emanate, and make themselves felt, and finally to make it magnetic, so that something in the thought form will call forth response from other thought forms or from the minds it may contact. When these three objectives have been reached, the life of the form itself is now so strong that it can pursue its own little life cycle and fulfill its work, being only linked to its creator by a tiny thread of radiant substance, which is a correspondence to the sutratma. All forms have such a sutratma. It links a man's bodies to the inner identity, or to that magnetic current which, emanating from the true identity, the solar logos, connects the creator of the solar system with his great thought form by a stream of energy from the central spiritual sun to a point in the center of the physical sun. End of page 99. As long as the attention of the creator of any thought form, great or small, is turned towards it, that magnetic link persists, the thought form is vitalized, and its work carried on. When the work has been accomplished, and the thought form has served its purpose, every creator, consciously or unconsciously, turns his attention elsewhere, and his thought form disintegrates. Just as long as the eye is directed to the created form, the current of force will be transmitted to it, and the more one-pointed the man may be, the more this energy will be centralized and effective. Much of the ineffectiveness of people is due to the fact that their interests are not centralized but very diffuse, and no one thing engrosses their attention. They scatter their energy and are attempting to satisfy every wandering desire, and to dabble in everything which comes their way. Therefore, no thought they think ever assumes a proper form, or is ever duly energized. They are consequently surrounded by a dense cloud of half-formed disintegrating thought forms and clouds of partially energized matter in process of dissolution. This produces a cultly a condition similar to the decay of a physical form, and is equally unpleasant and unwholesome. It accounts for much of the diseased condition of the human family at this time. Once the thought form has been vitalized and its etheric form is completed or sealed as it is called, it can attain the dense physical form if desired. This does not mean that the individual thought forms of every man take dense substance upon the etheric, but they will eventuate in activity upon the physical plane. A man, for instance, is thinking a kindly thought. He has built it up and vitalized it. It is objective to the clairvoyant and exists in etheric matter close to the man. It will, therefore, find physical expression in an act of kindness or a physical caress. When the act is over, the caress consummated, the interest of the man in that particular thought form fades out and it dies. Similarly with a crime, the thought form has been built up and inevitably it will find its physical expression in some deed of one kind or another. All activity of every kind is the result of thought forms built consciously or unconsciously, of self-initiated thought forms or of the effect of the thought forms of others, of responsiveness to one's own inner impulses, or of responsiveness to the impulses of others, and therefore to group thought forms. The nature of magic. We have considered somewhat at length the building of thought forms, and have seen that the process pursued by man is analogous to that pursued by the threefold logos in the creation of the solar system. We are to deal now with that great department in occultism which is usually termed magic. The man who masters the esoteric significance of what is here said will take his place in the ranks of those entitled to call themselves the brothers of white magic. We must deal first with the mental attitude of man as he faces the work of creation, and his ability to bring through, via the mental body, the purpose of the ego, thereby impressing the building agents on the mental plane with a certain rate of rhythm, and a certain vibratory activity. This is the prime factor which results, on the physical plane, in direct egoic activity. We must also consider the work of the wise magical student upon the astral plane, whereon, through purified desire and sanctified emotion, he provides those equilibrized conditions and those stable vibrations, which will permit of the transmission without hindrance to the physical plane via the physical brain of the man, of the vibratory activity emanating from the ego, and of the circulatory action of the higher force. Hence, if a remark of a practical nature may be interpolated for the average student, the cultivation of emotional tranquility is one of the first steps towards the achievement of the needed equipment of the white magician. This tranquility is not to be achieved by an effort of the will which succeeds in strangling all astral vibratory activity, but by the cultivation of response to the ego, and a negation of all response to the inherent vibration of the astral sheath itself. End of page 100. The white magician works entirely through the greater Deva builders, and through sound and numbers he blends their work, and thus influences the lesser builders who form the substance of their bodies, and therefore of all that is. He works through group centers and vital points of energy, and from thence produces, in substance, the desired results. The dark brother works directly with substance itself, and with the lesser builders, he does not cooperate with the forces which emanate from egoic levels. Conditions for white magic. In considering the factors requiring adjustment prior to undertaking the work of magic, we are dealing with that which is of eminently practical value. Unless students of magic enter upon this pursuit fortified by pure motive, clean bodies, and high aspiration, they are foredoomed to disappointment and even to disaster. All those who seek to work consciously with the forces of manifestation, and who endeavor to control the energies of all that is seen, need the strong protection of purity. This is a point which cannot be too strongly emphasized and urged, and hence the constant injunctions to self-control, comprehension of the nature of man, and devotion to the cause of humanity. The pursuit of magical investigation is dangerous in three ways. If a man's bodies are not sufficiently purified and their atomic vibration is not sufficiently high, he is in danger of overstimulation when brought in contact with the forces of nature, and this inevitably entails the destruction and disintegration of one or other of his bodies. At times it may entail the destruction of two or more, and when this is the case, it involves a definite setback to egoic unfoldment, for it requires, in such cases, a much longer interval between incarnations, owing to the difficulty of assembling the needed materials in the sheaths. Further, unless a man is strengthened in his endeavor by right motive, he is liable to be led astray by the acquisition of power. Knowledge of the laws of magic puts into the hands of the student powers which enable him to create, to acquire, and to control. Such powers are fraught with menace to the unprepared and unready, for the student can, in this case, turn them to selfish ends, use them for his own temporal material advancement, and acquire in this way that which will feed the desires of the lower nature. He takes, therefore, the first step towards the left-hand path, and each life may see him progressing towards it with greater readiness, until, almost unconsciously, he will find himself in the ranks of the Black Masters. Such a state of affairs can only be offset through the cultivation of altruism, sincere love of man, and a steady negation of all lower desire. The third danger which menaces the unwary student of magic lies in the fact that when he tampers with these forces and energies he is dealing with that which is akin to his own lower nature. He, therefore, follows the line of least resistance, he augments these energies, thereby increasing their response to the lower and to the material aspects of his nature. This he does at the expense of his higher nature, retarding its unfoldment and delaying his progress. Incidentally also, he attracts the attention of those masters of the left-hand path who are ever on the lookout for those who can be bent to their purposes, and he becomes, unwittingly at first, an agent on the side of evil. It will be apparent, therefore, that the student has need of the following qualities before he undertakes the arduous task of becoming a conscious master of magic. Physical purity. This is a thing not easily to be acquired, but entailing many lives of strenuous effort. Through abstinence, right continence, clean living, vegetarian diet, and rigid self-control, the man gradually raises the vibration of his physical atoms, builds a body of ever greater resistance and strength, and succeeds in manifesting forth in a sheath of greater refinement. Etheric freedom. This term does not convey all that I seek to impart, but it suffices for need of a better. The student of magic who can safely undertake the enterprise, will have constructed an etheric body of such a nature that vitality, or pranic force and energy, can circulate unimpeded. He will have formed an etheric web of such tenuosity that it forms no barrier to consciousness. This is all that can be said on this subject, owing to the danger involved, but it suffices for the conveyance of information to those who are beginning to know. End of page 101. Astral stability. The student of magic aims, above all, to purify his desires, and so to transmute his emotions that the lower physical purity and the higher mental responsiveness and transmutative power may equally be available. Every magician has to learn the fact that, in this solar system, during the cycle of humanity, the astral body is the pivotal point of endeavor, having a reflex effect on both the other sheaths, the physical and the mental. He, therefore, aims at transmuting, as has often been said, lower desire into aspiration, at changing the lower cruder colors which distinguish the astral body of average man, for the clearer, purer tones of the spiritual man, and of transforming its normal chaotic vibration, and the stormy sea of life for the steady rhythmic response to that which is highest and the center of peace. These things he effects by constant watchfulness, unremitting control, and steady meditation. Mental poise. These words are used in the occult sense, wherein the mind, as it is commonly understood, becomes the keen steady instrument of the indwelling thinker, and the point from which he can travel onwards to higher realms of comprehension. It is the foundation stone whence the higher expansion can be initiated. Let not the would-be student of magic proceed in his investigations and his experiments until he has attended to these injunctions, and until the whole bent of his thought is towards their manifestation and their demonstration in his everyday life. When he has so worked, ceaselessly and untiringly, and his physical plane life and service bear witness to the inner transmutation, then he can proceed to parallel this life with magical studies and work. Only the solar angel can do the work of the white magician, and he effects it through the control of the lunar angels and their complete subjugation. They are arrayed against him, until, through meditation, aspiration, and control, he bends them to his will and they become his servants. End of chapter 21.